welcome to MyData-NEWS. So it's the third one and it's about news from November. Yes, let's start with life science news. So there was a fine for leaving medical prescription unattended. The Italian DPA was informed that a doctor delivered medical prescriptions to patients through a singular method. So the professional used to hang the medical prescription with clothespins outside the window of her medical office, located on the ground floor of a public street. So the name of patients and content of the prescriptions were thus publicly accessible by pedestrians. And this procedure constitutes a violation of the GDPR, and in particular, integrity and confidentiality, a lack of adoption of security measures to protect personal data, since the information could be accidentally or unlawfully accessed by third parties, and special categories of data were involved, so the duty of care is higher. And here, specific procedures established by government to deliver medical information and prescription were not followed. At the beginning of the month, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner published its determination, which followed a joint investigation by the Australian Data Protection Authority and the UK one, the ICO, which found that Clearview Artificial Intelligence breached Australians' privacy by scraping their biometric information from the web and disclosing it through a facial recognition tool. So the ICO worked with the Australian Data Protection Authority on the evidence-gathering stage of the investigation. Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare report provides an overview of national strategies, the uses and plans for AI in healthcare, and stakeholders' views. So this study presents an overview of the development, adoption and use of AI technologies and application in the healthcare sector across all member states. The study helped the Commission to take action to achieve its long-term goal on the effective implementation of AI in the healthcare sector and based around common legislation and policy framework. And according to this study, while most EU member states have developed AI strategy that identify healthcare as a priority sector, there are no policies within those strategies targeting healthcare in particular. So EU member states have made progress in proposing regulatory frameworks around the management of health data, and which is a foundational element for the further development of AI technologies in the healthcare sector. I will follow with the second part, the data protection. So when renders, there has been good evolution on data flow discussion with the United States. So we can read in the Washington Post reports, European Union Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders said he wants to work with the US regulators to better protect consumer online. So the commissioner, who met with US regulators during a trip to Washington last week, also said the two sides are making progress on issues like transatlantic data flows to replace the EU-US privacy shield. After that, dispatch from Brussels, some clarification for EU data transfer on the horizon. So there is less clarity, however, around a potential privacy shield framework. Things appears to have slowed down regarding a new transatlantic agreement. So if we read what Gencarelli said, negotiation on privacy shield keeps us busy around the clock. It is a priority of ours. Last month, there seems to be a bit more optimist that something will come out by the end of the year, but that appeared to be half of the table for the moment. They admit that it was limited in what he could say publicly regarding the negotiation, but he emphasized that a new agreement between the US and the EU will need to be sustainable and durable. Last week, several sessions at the IAPP Data Protection Congress 2021 addressed the increasingly complex topics of data transfer. So one of the major topics involved questions around transfers of personal data from the EU. And the European Commission Head of International Data Flows and Protection, Bruno Gencarelli, said that direct collection of personal data from individuals in the EU will never be a transfer. He suggested the EDPB, which is hosting a plenary meeting this week, will make that guidance clear. He also said to expect a geographical rather than a jurisdictional definition of personal data transfer this week. And one major thing is also said was that Commission will release a Q&A on standard contractual clauses from stakeholders early in 2022.
Authorities conduct first review of EU-Japan Mutual Adequacy Agreement. So the Personal Information Protection Commission of Japan, the European Commission, and other data protection authorities conduct the first review of the EU and Japan Mutual Adequacy Agreement adopted in 2019. So the review covers application, legal development in data protection, and government access to data, and also other stuff. According to the PPC Commissioner, the joint review meeting has confirmed the closeness of their respective data protection system. The European Commission and the PPC will subsequently publish separate reports reviewing their respective adequacy decision.
US Senator introduced the Digital Accountability and Transparency to Advance Privacy Act to strengthen data privacy protections for American consumers. So, U.S. Senators' bill will strengthen data privacy protections, foster the use of new data security and privacy protection best practices, and hold major corporations that handle consumer data accountable without placing unnecessary burdens on small businesses. This Privacy Act is focusing on implementing new data security standards and essentially privacy protections. So this legislation will, for instance, empower customers by allowing them to request, dispute the accuracy, and transfer or delete their data without retribution in the form of price or service discrimination by companies.
The European Commission pursued action against Belgium over independence of the Data Protection Authority. The European Commission is pursuing against Belgium over concerns its Data Protection Authority is not operating independently as required under the EU General Data Protection Regulation. The Commission said some members of the DPA cannot be regarded as free from external influence, as they either report to a management committee, have participated in COVID-19 contact tracing, or are member of the Information Security Committee. So Belgium have 2 months to take actions, or the case may be referred to the Court of Justice of the European Union.
Belgian DPA expected to rule that IAB Europe's cookie consent framework violates the GDPR. So beginning of November, IAB Europe announced that in the coming weeks, the Belgian Data Protection Authority plans to share with other data protection authorities a draft ruling on the IAB EU Transparency and Consent Framework. And this is called the TCF, and this DCF is a GDPR consent solution built by IAB EU that has become a widely used approach to collecting consent to cookies under the GDPR. The draft ruling is expected to find that the TCF does not comply with the GDPR, in part because IAB EU acts as the controller, and the digital signals the TCF creates to capture individuals' consent to cookies are personal data under the GDPR. And because IAB EU does not consider itself a controller with respect to the TCF, it does not currently comply with the GDPR's controller obligations. So this matter may be referred to the EDPB for a binding decision. We have another big question from ICO. Do rules on cookie still apply if the data is anonymous? The answer is yes. So although cookies that process personal data give rise to greater privacy and security risk than those that process anonymous data, PRCR in UK or e-privacy directive in EU apply to all cookies. So if your cookie data is not anonymous, note that you will also need to comply with Data Protection Act and UK GDPR or the EU GDPR. You may need to carry out a data protection impact assessment also. And at the same time, you should be aware that the creation of anonymous information may involve processing of personal data. For example, to generate aggregate statistics based on user interaction. And this processing would therefore be covered by the GDPR.
So Facebook plans to remove sensitive ad targeting options next year. So Facebook announced this plan to remove detailed ad targeting options that refer to sensitive topics, such as ads based on interactions with content about race, health, religious practices, political belief, or sexual orientation. It said the change will take place at the beginning of January, so they said January 2022. So this decision to remove these detailed targeting options was not easy, and they know this change may negatively impact some businesses and organizations. But advertisers on Facebook platforms can still target audiences by location, use their own customer list, reach customer audiences who have engaged with their content and send ads to people with similar characteristics to those users. And also, we want to come back to September. WhatsApp is changing its European privacy policy after the record fine. So the Irish Data Protection Commission hit WhatsApp with a colossal €2,025 million for failing to properly comply with GDPR legislation in Europe. So the changes involve not only reorganizing privacy policy documentation for better clarity, but also providing additional details in a number of areas.
And now some updates on the legislation. EDPB has published its guidelines on interplay between Article 3 and Chapter 5 of GDPR. Public consultation will be open until the end of January. And the aim of its guidelines is to help controllers and processors in the EU to identify whether a processing operation constitutes an international transfer and to provide a common EU understanding on the concept of international transfers. The guidelines specify 3 cumulative criteria that qualify a processing as a transfer. The data exporter, a controller or processor, is subject to the GDPR for the given processing. The data exporter transmits or makes available the personal data to the data importer, so another controller, joint controller, or processor, and the data importer is in a third country or is an international organization. So the processing will be considered as a transfer regardless of whether the importer established in a third country is already subject to the GDPR under Article 3. However, the EDPB considers that collection of data directly from data subjects in the EU at their own initiative does not constitute a transfer.
The EU Whistleblower Directive deadline is approaching, but are you ready? So individuals working in private or public organizations are often the first to know about threat to the public interest and violation of EU law. However, fears of retaliation may discourage reporting of breaches in a work-related context. So the Whistleblowing Directive entered into force on the 16th of December 2019, and the member states are required to transpose the directive into national legislation by the 17th of December this year. So a number of member states have already implemented the directive, but the overall implementation status across the EU continues to vary.
Council of Europe has published its updated recommendation on data protection in the context of profiling, aligning its provision with Convention 108. So, recommendation refers to profiling as any form of automated processing of personal data, including use of machine learning systems, consisting in the use of data to evaluate certain personal aspects relating to an individual, in particular to analyze or predict aspects concerning that person's performance at work, economic situation, health, personal preferences, etc. The committee calls on states to promote and make legally binding the use of privacy by design approach during the whole duration of the processing. It also suggests that they take appropriate measures against the development and use of technologies which are aimed wholly or partly at the illicit circumvention of technical measures protecting privacy.
So the Chinese PPL takes effect, and it's a compliance challenge. So the China's News Personal Information Protection Laws takes effect since the beginning of the month, just over 2 months after its adoption, so it was very quick, with companies seeking to figure out how to best comply and regulator working to answer remaining questions. So the PIPL is coming into effect after a remarkably short period, and there are a lot of issues. Implementation measures were expected from the regulator in mid-October, but they have been delayed. So compliance is not so straightforward, and companies are eagerly awaiting guidance. But the GPDP issues notice on the PIPL and Personal Data Protection Act. So at the beginning of November, the Office for Personal Data Protection, so the GPDP, issued a notice which highlights that the PIPL is also applicable abroad and closely linked to resident public entities and private companies in Macau, who should take action to ensure their compliance regarding the PIPL.
In Brazil, Board of Directors approved the regulation on the supervision process and administrative sanctioning process within the National Data Protection Authority. So this Board of National Data Protection Authority approved, end of October, the regulation of the oversight process and the administrative sanctioning process. So this regulation established the procedure for supervision, monitoring activities, guidance, and preventive action, as well as determining the rules to be observed on the application of sections. So this resolution will come into force on the date of its publication, and the first monitoring cycle will beginning in January 2022. And with this, the National Data Protection Authority will be able to perform inspection, analyze the compliance or not of data processing agents, minimize risk, and prevent irregular practices. And in this way, the aim of the authority to be able to foster a culture of personal data protection in Brazil will go through guidance and education measures for both data processors and data subjects.
So for the Uganda, newly operation PDPO requires data collectors, processor, and controller to register by December 2021. So the Personal Data Protection Office, so PDPO, issued a press release highlighting that it had been operationalized in August 2021 following the passage of the Data Protection and Privacy Regulation, and is now requiring data collectors, processor, and controller to register on its website. But you have a grace period up to the end of December 2021 to allow for the registration process by all relevant organizations and persons, adding that it will begin enforcement measure against organizations and persons who have not registered in January 2022.
In Australia, government sets direction for privacy law reform. So at the end of October, Australian government released a discussion paper crammed full of proposals to amend the national privacy law. One of the team running through this review process is the need to ensure the Privacy Act is brought closer in line with the GDPR in the hope that Australia could finally secure an adequacy decision from the European Commission, which would open up more possibility for trade in personal information. And to date, an adequacy ruling has escaped Australia, primarily because of a number of caveats from the Privacy Act's coverage of the private sector, including exemptions for small businesses, employee records, political parties, and media organizations. And yet, the discussion papers has not directly proposed removing these keywords. Instead, it raises a number of issues and options and calls for yet more submission on the pros and cons of abolishing the 4 exemptions. So expect to see a significant debate with further pushback from organizations currently benefiting from these exemptions.
So Quebec's update privacy law complicates cross-border data flows. So the law brings Quebec more in line with European General Data Protection Regulation, but you have some nuance means businesses must act precisely or face hefty regulatory penalties and consumer-led litigation through the law's private right of action. So the Bill 64 requires companies to conduct privacy impact assessments for the transfer of personal information outside of Quebec and appoint designated privacy officers. Most of the law's provision takes effect in September 2023, but others come into force in 2022 or 2024.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Manon.
Thank you, everyone. Do not hesitate to subscribe on our channel.
And we hope to see you in a month.
See you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.